cried the sparrow.
You're listening to the Sailing into Oblivion podcast, where we sit down with everyday people who do extraordinary things. I'm your host, Jerome Rand.
Good morning from a frosty northern Michigan in the early a.m. Feeling pretty good to be alive. I'm not going to lie. The sounds of the birds chirping away really is the world's best alarm clock. But today we are sitting down with M42 Adventures. These guys reached out to me and wanted to sit down and chat and learn a little bit about the world of ocean solo sailing, and I was more than happy to oblige. And I sat down with Rick, who is part of the M42 Adventures team. They're also running this program called Genesis, where essentially you become kind of a member, and they do all sorts of outings and group sessions where they basically take people who want to go out into this world and have their own type of adventure, and they help them do that, whether it's surfing, hiking, possibly in the future sailing. This is kind of what they do, and it's really interesting. It was great to talk to Rick and hear his take and his involvement with this whole thing and why and how he became and got into this position. And besides that, it was just a heck of a good time to sit and chat and throw ideas and stories back and forth. So hopefully you enjoy that. I'll put links in the description for their website and for their Instagram and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, before we start the show, like I always say, if you want to help support this podcast and possible future adventures, the way you can do that, the way you can support this is check the links in the description for the Patreon family. If you don't like doing that, we got the one-time donations via Venmo, PayPal, that sort of stuff. We also have the merch, the books. There's a GoFundMe out there because I'm hoping to do the Atlantic Figure 8 either next year or the year after, and that takes a lot of coin. So if you want to do it safely, I gotta put the old hand out, you know what I mean? And then we've also got the Amazon wish list, and if you want to just reach out to the show, or you're looking for information about me as a speaker or as a coach and a consultant, check out sailingintooblivion.com, and you can also reach directly out to the show. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Rick at M42 Adventures. Thanks for listening.
So that's awesome, man.
That's a little bit about me, you know. I mean, we just go all over the world, and obviously not on a boat, but I love the idea of a boat. I've talked to my wife about it. I've got 4 kids now. We've come home twice for about 10 or 11 months to have a baby.
Oh, okay, so they're young.
Yep, my oldest is 13. And I just had a baby girl that's 4 months old. We left when she was 2 months, and we just left for 3 months, and she's about 5 months old now. So,
congratulations! That's the adventure I have yet to go on. I think
wild,
I'm aging out of it, but
yeah. How old are you?
I'm 46, and luckily
I just had a baby, bro. You can do it.
I don't even have a girlfriend, man. I've got a long way to go.
That's a little hard. That's a little hard, yeah.
I have a lot of little cousins and stuff like that, which because I travel so much, I get to pop in quite often, which is really cool. And
absolutely.
Usually at the end of a long weekend with about 3, 4 to 6 to 9-year-olds, I'm ready to hop in the car and hit the road again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was going to say there's probably a very close relation to me being on the road for, I was just with my wife and kids. We left 1st of March, and we were gone for 70 days together, 24/7.
Wow.
4 kids. We drove total in Costa Rica, we drove 1,200 miles. In the States, we drove 9,000. So a little over 10,000 miles.
Jeez.
And I'm like, there's probably a very... because I want to get into, the mental fortitude you have to go solo. There's probably a very similar mental fortitude to go with your wife and 4 kids,
A little bit. Well, because I do a lot of consulting on boats and helping people sort of gain the confidence to go offshore and all that. And some of them, I actually just did a trip that was 16 days with this guy, Mark, on his boat, and, 2 people on a 32-foot boat. I think in some ways it can be kind of extreme because you can't get off the boat. You're locked in this little capsule essentially, and still dealing with Mother Nature in sort of a rawest form. And I mean, you have to give leeway, you have to give up privacy, and you just kind of got to accept things, or else it'll drive you crazy.
Did you know him? Did you know him very well before you did that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't go out to sea. When I was younger, and when I in my early to mid 20s, that's when I cut my teeth on the ocean doing yacht deliveries and stuff. And I'd take a job with people I'd never met in my life to go across the Atlantic. You'd show up, there's 5 people there, and you just got to make it work. And there were, more often than not, everybody made new friends. It was a blast. But there were a few times where we pulled into the next port, and then the captain would look and be like, "You two, you're out of here. Pack your bags. You got 1 hour." And you're like, "Whoa, I didn't even see that coming." Like, and it's just underlying aggression that you can't take out at sea. But once you get to land, if there was a big problem, it's just like, get out of here.
Yeah, it's funny because I was telling my wife last night, I was in the hot tub. I got out of the hot tub and I went into my wife and I'm like, "You're not going to believe who Chase got." And she's like, "That's awesome." And I says, "Yeah, I'm going to ask him, I says, I want to see if he'll sell to like Hawaii with me or something." And she says, "Rick, careful, like you don't know this guy. He doesn't know you. 20 days on a little boat." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right." But so let's jump into it. So you're obviously a sailor. You're a speaker. You're a author. You've written a book. Okay.
I have. Yep.
And a coach. So how did this start? Like, I mean, you've always, because most people like me, I had to work in corporate America or had to have a day job similar to like selling with Phoenix. What's his name? I don't even know his name.
Oliver.
Yep.
So the cat most people, is named Phoenix.
Okay. Yeah. So, most people, they dream of the life you're living, right? And they don't know how to connect that dot. How did you connect the dot? It sounds like you might have just started out just a free spirit, or did you, or not?
Not quite. I mean, I worked for many, many years in the sort of resort industry up here in northern Michigan and then down in the British Virgin Islands. And I was running water sports centers, but whenever you're in the hospitality sort of realm, that's, you're a people pleaser, you're trying to put on these events and all that. And after 5 years down in the islands, I was so burnt out because I was, 24/7, always on call. I had a crazy, super fun bunch of captains and sailing instructors under me. But, after a while, you just run out of steam. And so I decided to take a break after 5 years and go hike the Appalachian Trail. And
how old were you?
One, I was, at that time, that was 2012. I must have been like 32, 33, something like that.
Okay.
And that was really the impetus for everything, because that was the first time I wasn't like working towards my career in sailing and managing all that sort of stuff. And it was the first time I was like, you know what? Life is more than just work. Let's go out. And I had been inspired by, Bill Bryson's book, A Walk in the Woods. And I read all this other stuff. And, I love getting out there and going camping, but I'd never done anything more than like a week. And I was like, man, that sounds like a really fun challenge. And it was like, I had an absolute blast doing that trail. It took me 133 days. And
that's a minute.
I thought you were going to say, you went out for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. No,
Dude,
that one,
a third of a year.
2,200 miles. Yeah. I mean, it goes from Georgia all the way to Maine through 14 states, and it's brutal, but I don't know. I've always had, since I was younger, I've always had this ability to sort of not like shuck off the whole idea of like suffering, like when you're in a real uncomfortable position, but I almost somehow kind of enjoy it because I know that eventually when it ends, it's going to bring about like this amazing feeling of release and like pure joy, because you're just like, dude, that was a nightmare for the last 36 hours, but now it's sunny and I'm like, this is great. So I have that kind of mentality.
That's a huge deal. That is so important for what you're talking about. I think a lot of people don't have the faith or the belief in themselves. Did you do that one solo? Was that solo?
Yeah, but
Just had some friends jump in or whatever.
The biggest, I started out solo, and then you just meet people, especially in the beginning, because there's so many people that attempt it each year. And then slowly but surely, as you make your way north, people just are dropping off left, right, and center. And by the time you hit New England, you're pretty much alone. And I think I was alone for about 75 days. Camping in the mountains by myself, listening to all the creatures and all that sort of stuff. And that actually lended itself to building kind of the confidence that I could take on the next adventure, which was to go around the world alone. And yeah,
that's insane. I have a buddy, I haven't spent a lot of time alone. It's just one of those things where I've always had people around me, and I choose that. And I have a buddy who goes hunting a lot, and he goes alone.
Yeah.
And he has a ton of friends. It's like it's not like he has to. He just says, I like to go alone, kind of reset. It's for 4 or 5 days, not a long time, but he's like, Rick, it is so healthy. And I've never done it. It's honestly one of those things that I've never, been alone for more than a few days. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm afraid of it or what, might come out in my thoughts or what, I'm sure there's probably some healthy stuff to that, and probably some negative stuff that can come from that long of solitude, right?
Well, I find that it takes my brain a few days just to adjust to it. And, we live in a society now that's just, we're inundated, connected. There's so much input coming into our brains all the time. When you do quiet all that down and you know that you're going to be alone for even, let's say, like 5 days, after a couple of days of kind of an uneasy feeling, and even after all the time I've spent by myself, I still have to like break through that. Then you just get into this mode where you have plenty of time to think. It's not interrupted ever by anything. And, I almost equate it to like a childlike mentality where, suddenly you can sit there and like watch the clouds for a couple hours and feel 100% contentment and happiness and just enjoyment in the moment. And I think more than anything, that's one of the things that being alone does, is it kind of brings you back into the present moment, and you're not thinking about other stuff. Now, caveat, usually when I'm alone out there, I don't have cell phone service or any of that. So that helps as well. Cause I think a lot of people get alone and the first thing they do is they whip out their phone and they just start doom scrolling. And that kind of defeats the purpose of like, I'm going to take some time to just think and have my thoughts and be present in the here and now.
Yeah, I love that. I have a property here in Utah, and I went out there yesterday, and I'm walking around, and I've been kind of stressed out. I'm looking at doing a couple acquisitions and some things, and it's sort of the reason we came home, actually. And so I'm out there, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to turn my phone off for an hour. I'm going to sit under this tree, and it's an hour. It's not days. Yeah. It's not weeks. And I just sat there, and it's weird. It's a weird thing, like you said, where we don't have that enough. I think it's a detriment, and I have young kids, and they don't have phones. I've got a 13-year-old that's like, all my friends have phones, and I'm like, I don't care what they have. I'll give you what I think you need when you need it as your father, and you don't need a phone right now, And but I think you're absolutely right. That is something that's actually pretty simple, that most people that are listening could go do. Go out there, turn your phone off, go into the mountains, and just be alone for a couple hours and see what comes out of that. See what, I'm going to do that. I'm inspired to do more of that from this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we live in such a busy time in our history, and it's like this constant thing where, oh, if you're bored, well, here are all these distractions to fill that time. Well, one of the things I've often thought about is when I was younger, and again, I'm old enough to remember a time before phones and all that.
Yeah, me too.
It seemed like the afternoon, if you had all afternoon to do stuff, it lasted forever. It just felt like time was just so slow. And now every minute that we're not like engaged in something, people are flipping through their phones to almost like, it almost feels like it speeds up the time a bit. And I think sometimes boredom is a blessing because it gives you that time to think and time to ponder and again, just take in the world around you. I mean, like you said, I like going just out into the woods. I don't even have to go for a walk. If I find a nice place to sit and just take in the trees and the leaves, and I don't know,
favorite.
I feel like it's just like a healing thing almost. But it's hard to break your mind out of that sort of cycle of like, I need more input. I need to know what's going on and I need to connect.
Yeah, 100%. I used to be, before I retired and just kind of walked away from things, I was a workaholic. I worked, mostly out of necessity, trying to dig out of the hole that I had created. But I bragged a lot about, to my dad and friends, like, hey man, I worked 80 hours this week. I worked 90 hours this week. And, and then I read the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, and it's like, that's what changed my life. That book changed my life. It's like, wow, I can get this down. If I'm smart, I could get this down to 4 hours a week working. And once I kind of got that mentality of the goal isn't to work as much as you can. The goal is to work as little as you can. But yeah, I think especially Americans, when I'm traveling around the world, they always say you guys are just running crazy, and you go to Italy and France and Spain and they take months off and they sit on the beach and they enjoy life and they, have 2 or 3 hours. I remember when we first went to, I think it was Spain, their dinners are 3 or 4 hours, and we're Americans were like, what is happening? Like, why is our food not
come
coming?
On, let's get going.
And they're like, you're supposed to be having fun and enjoying this. And, and I'm like, oh, okay, let me try that. And now we love it, and now we go have dinner and we take 2 or 3 hours because it's not about feeding your face and running out of the restaurant. It's about spending time with the people you love. So yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that first 15 minutes of this. That is, I got to think more on that. So you did the Appalachian Trail, 100 and how many days?
133 days. Yeah. And that's not even, that's midway between fast and slow. People who do it really fast, who are crunched for time, will try and do it in 100 days. And then if you're really able to take your time, most people will take like 150 or more. And you're just kind of trying to keep spring right on your shoulder so that you avoid the worst of the bugs and the cold weather, but it's not sweltering. And 2012, when I did it, was a great year. We didn't have a ton of rain. There were a lot of cool people. There's no murders on the trail, which is good.
No murders.
Does that happen?
It does. I think there's been about 10 or 12 over all the years. But, that being said, like if you draw a 2,000-mile line through anywhere in America, you're going to come across
run into some trouble.
That sort of stuff. Yeah. So I think the last one was super gruesome. That was in 2019. And the Outside podcast did a show about that one that's just terrifying what happened.
Wow.
But
there's nothing scarier to me than humans.
Like the magazine podcast?
Yeah, the Outside Magazine podcast. It's I forget what episode it was, but they actually had the girl who survived it come in and do the interview and tell the story, and it's just I don't know. I only ran into a couple real oddball people, but whenever I did, I moved on, and I moved on with the pace.
Yeah.
Like there was no hanging around.
Yeah. So you did that, and then how did you get into, where did you go from there? What was next? How did you decide on sailing?
Essentially, I had already done quite a bit of sailing. I had a a sizable amount of experience, 3 ocean crossings where I did from, the States or the Caribbean over into the Med, from South Africa up to the Caribbean. So I had quite a bit of experience, but no solo sailing experience. And I essentially, by the time I got off Mount Katahdin up in Maine, I was like, all right, this is it. I need more adventure. This is the new goal. But at that time, I had 0 savings. I had a dirty old backpack and I didn't have a job or a boat. So I've got nothing. So it's like start at ground level, and came up with my game plan and essentially was able to get hired back on down in the Caribbean at a place called the Bitter End Yacht Club, which is an epic spot for sailing, one of the best in the world. And did
Where's
that
that
for
at?
about... That's down in the British Virgin Islands on Virgin Gorda. And they got completely wiped out in the Hurricane Irma in 2017. But they have since finally rebuilt. They're rebuilding the villas, and they got their water sports center. And they used to have like 100 sailboats that people could use. And so it was kind of like a mecca for that. But went back down, worked for 3.5 years, and the beauty of that was that I can live on site, so I was able to save like absolutely everything. And I think one of the big lessons at that particular time was having that very specific goal, both financially and trying to find a boat, and this big adventure set in my mind gave me so much drive and so much energy and purpose, I guess. Every day I just woke up and I was like, all right, I know why I'm saving. I know why I'm getting out of bed. I know why I'm going to give it like 100% every single day. And, lo and behold, 3.5 years later, I was able to put in my 2 weeks notice and go and search for the boat and hop on it once I found it.
The Sparrow, right?
Mighty Sparrow. Yeah.
I love it, dude.
Mighty Sparrow.
You said something there. So you don't know much about the M42, but the concept of it is, so M42 is the scientific name for the Orion constellation, which is behind me.
Cool.
Yeah, that's like NASA's name for it. We wanted Orion, but you can't trademark that, right?
Right.
So we had to go a little deeper. So that's what M42 Adventures is. It's just basically taking people on adventures. We took people to Africa and Alaska and Hawaii, and I just took people to Costa Rica surfing. So just a real quick rundown. I want to touch on what you just said there, but a quick rundown is we have this online community. There's 250. It's a year old. It's actually like 8 months or 6 months old. No, it was started in November.
The podcast?
No, the community.
Oh, yeah, the community is
7 months old. We've got 250 something members. It's free. We don't charge. That's one of the beauties of this is my financial situation is I want to really change the world. I nothing against the communities that charge and all that. I understand that can be necessary. We have costs here and things like that, but we eat the costs. And but it's trying to get people to go on adventures, right? So we have these channels inside the online community of sailing, surfing, hunting, fishing, mountain biking. There's 26 channels?
Yeah, right now.
26 channels. Wow. We have mentors with them. So we
11
have
of them.
11 of the channels have mentors. Mm-hmm. So we have these mentors that come in. The concept was I've been traveling the world. I love life. I want to try sailing. I want to try, mountain biking. But for me to try to get into sailing,
it'd be so much money.
Is going to be decades. But if I can get a mentor like you that will come in and teach us about sailing, then that to me is the cheat code, is what I call them. So we have these mentors. We have 11 of them filled so far. We've got 14 not filled, or 15. Let's do my math right. Mm-hmm. And so I'm the finance mentor and the travel mentor. So I help people travel. I tell them how I have traveled the world, and we do a live Zoom call once a month, and then we interact inside the Genesis. Right, that's the online community. It's called the Genesis.
Yeah.
And so I'm the finance one. And what you just said right there is what I tell most people. When I first started making money before the recession and I got annihilated, money was just coming in, and it was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing with this, so I'm just going to have it go out.
Yeah.
And once we lost everything, and me and my wife and my newborn child were sitting in this, we were literally homeless for a little bit. And then once we got, back on our feet a little bit, it was like, listen, what do we want to do? We played the game, we lost. Let's try to, get back up and do it again. And my wife's like, well, I'd like a house, I'd like a car. And I says, let's think bigger. I'd like to retire. By the time I was 31 at the time, I says, I'd like to retire in 10 years and travel the world. And she's like, I didn't even think that was a possibility. I don't even know.
Right.
We've never been raised by that. My parents, her parents, we were poor. It was never an option. And I says, I think we can do this. But once we got that goal on the horizon, I tell everybody, I didn't take a day off work for 3 years. That was my longest stretch, 1,000 days in a row working. We ate top ramen, for years. We didn't get,
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
I know that one.
Yep. So what you said right there is, I think, so important for people who are trying to find these, they want to go do these things. It's like, identify, if it is a boat you want, or it is to travel, or if it's a, big house, whatever it may be. Once you identify it, I think it's so much easier to get out of bed and go for it.
Yeah, well, and to your point, the specificity? No.
I don't know, specificness? I don't know.
Yeah, something like that. Well, making that goal very specific, that's a better way to say it.
There we go.
I find that helps because it really, it allows you, like, as an example, like if your goal is to, like, I want to lose some weight. Mm-hmm. If you say that, then that leaves you a lot of wiggle room to be like, well, I did pretty good this week. But if you say, well, I want to lose 15 pounds, until you get to that goal, you know that you have to stay disciplined. You have to keep at it and all that stuff. And it's the same with things like adventures that you might want to go on. If you're like, well, I'd like to go on an adventure, or I'd like to travel in the next 5 years. Well, that's great. But if you are like, I want to do 7 continents, and we're going to start this, and it's going to be a 3-month trip, and then you can start planning it, and that sort of almost can snowball the enthusiasm and the energy to keep going at it. Because we always find, there's highs and lows when it comes to the preparations and the work it takes to get to those goals. And, it's great when it's high and you're like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. But when you're not feeling it, that's when you need these little tricks up your sleeve to sort of keep prodding you forward and keep the momentum going. Because you lose that momentum and then all of a sudden you're stuck again. And that's when people have a tendency, I think, to kind of be like, well, I think we ought to change our plan. And that's not what you want to have happen.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. I tell people all the time, and you're right. I tell people when they say, I want to travel, I'm like, where do you want to go?
Yeah.
Are you packing flip-flops, or are you packing snow boots? It's like, let's get this down to where you can, like you said, if you just say, I want to travel, it's too broad. But if you say, I'm going to go to, I want to go to the Coliseum and sit on the porch and have a cappuccino. It's like, put a picture of the Coliseum on your wall and look at it every day and dream about being there. And I'm sure you're this way. I think you'd have to be, but I'm very mathematical. I run numbers. Yeah. It's like, how much, like with weight loss, it's like, how many calories do I need to, eat and burn and to get to this goal by that amount of time, and I do a lot of that. I would think you'd have to do a lot of that with sailing, with
the navigation side of things. Yeah,
I got to end up here, and I got this much food, and I got this much fuel, and I got this much.
I've learned that the hard way for sure. Like, if you ever do read the book, you'll find out.
I'm going to. What is it's called Sailing into Oblivion?
Sailing into Oblivion. Yeah,
100%. I'm going to.
Essentially, I did a very bad job of provisioning, and I paid the ultimate price of basically having to ration for about 3 months, where I lost about 45 pounds. And
whoa,
yeah, it was brutal. It was real brutal.
Whoa, and not a few days.
No,
months.
Like the entire Pacific Ocean, I was so hungry. And just, the worst part is you're on this boat and you have a decent pile of food, but it's not going to go the distance. And so you're staring at it, but you can't eat it. And
that's wild.
It's
yeah,
the
that's a whole
thing.
different level where you're starving, but you can't eat it because you know you got to have this many calories to get to survive.
That's true fasting right there.
Dude.
'Cause you have it,
yeah.
and you have to not eat it.
That's crazy. So, okay, I got to go a little faster because I'm going to run out of time. I could literally, I promise you, this isn't a dig on anybody else or whatever, but I don't get inspired by a lot of people, really. You know, I mean, there's obviously quite a bit, but very few humans just intrigue me, and you're one of them, man. Like, I just.
Well, it's one of those things where in this conversation, it's interesting because I feel like there's like some really really high achievers and things like that, and their mentality and their drive comes from a certain place, but you're really laid back and just, you know, kind of fun loving kind of personality, and it's different from most of the like really high functioners that I'm used to like listening to and talking.
Yeah, more like a free spirit. And then the other thing too is, you know, you wasn't rich. You know, when we left for France, you know, I was like, I told my wife, I says, I think we can go for, you know, maybe a year if we're smart and we, you know, stay in some pretty rough places, and we got to be smart about this. We're not out of the woods yet. I don't want to go back. And, you know, it's carried on for 9 years, but it's a different story when you have a couple $1 million in the bank and a big yacht and a crew. And it's like, hey, I sailed the world. You know, it's like, I like hearing from people like you that sacrificed and dreamed and, you know, took the time to get there. And it's like, that's what to me, life is inspiring.
Well, and it's one of those things where I could have opted for reaching out for sponsors and all that sort of stuff before the trip. But a big part of this whole experience, I thought, you know, when I finish this thing, I want to be able to look back and say, you know, I did this pretty much all on my own. I did it, you know, I pulled up my bootstraps and all that. Yeah. And I, you know, I also didn't want anybody tainting the trip by, you know, wanting certain things out of it. And you know, also, truth be told, part of me was like, I got a very little chance of being successful, and I don't want anybody else's expectations being let down by me not being able to actually complete this task. I mean, there is if you buy a 40-something-year-old boat and you set off to go and try and sail nonstop around the world, like the chance of you actually making it unassisted and without, you know, any outside stuff, it's like just nearly impossible. It's just
I bet your
that
odds
tough.
were closer to sinking than succeeding.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean,
You know what I mean?
There's equipment failure. The Southern Ocean is just the most brutal place on our planet, and you've got in an old boat like that, I had to spend 4.5 months down there. Whereas, you know, these super high end 60-foot boats that rip around the world in like 50, 60, 70 days, like they get down there, but they're fast enough to be able to stay with the weather systems. I just get bowled over by them one after another. And so there's an endurance factor that kind of goes along with it. All different. Anybody that sails around the world, no matter how fast or slow the boat is, you're going to face very serious challenges. Those fast boats are so loud and so jarring that even that short amount of time that they might be in the Southern Ocean is a brutal assault on the senses to an extent that I have no idea about. But at the same time, when I talk to people that do that, they look at me and they're like, I don't know how you go the distance and you're down there for that long and you're in a boat that's going that slow. But that was the journey that I was looking for, because I was trying to really seek out what it was like to do that sort of voyage back in the late 60s, early 70s, when it was first taken on as a challenge by, you know, Robin Knox Johnson was the first guy to do it. And then subsequent people followed, but it was all done in these old, you know, what are called heavy displacement, full keel boats that slowly make your way around the world. It's going to take you 9 months at minimum, but that was the experience that I was looking for personally, because I was curious about how it was going to change me, if I could stand up to it, and just what that experience was really like.
Yeah, and you said something there, because when we first left, like I said, we you know, I could see out 9 to 12 months. but my wife was like, hey, listen, you know, there's a lot of these people. This was 9 years ago. So 2000, about when you did yours, 2017 is when I left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we left in March of 2017 was when I, you know, headed out. And but she says, hey, I think I could probably get us some sponsors. And I'm like, you know, I just don't want to have to take photos of something, stand there and be like, hey, here's this backpack. It's great. You know, I really, my social media was private until a year ago. I actually didn't even want to do a podcast. I have a partner on this that has a huge podcast. And I said, he's you know, mentoring me and I says, I want to start this adventure company and I want to take people around the world doing amazing things in all aspects of outdoors. And he's like, dude, then you're going to have to turn your privacy off on your, your social media. You're going to have to start doing a podcast. You're going to have to start filming things. And I do not like that side of it, honestly. You know, I love the podcast. I love the conversations, but the lights and the technology and all that stuff, I just turn off. And so I can understand 100% where you're coming from, where it's like, I don't need people, you know, having expectations or pressures. It's like, I just want to do my thing. You know, I was just in Costa Rica for a month and we're doing an M42 adventure surf experience down there. And I just was like, I don't want to have this pressure of film this, do it this way, you know, get that shot. It's like, I turn off on that stuff. I want to be in the moment. First of all, I want to be there with my family and enjoying it, you know, and second of all, I don't want somebody else standing over my shoulder saying you should do it this way. So I resonate with that 1,000%.
Well, and I mean, both those things, the person and the pressure that's put on you when you do have those sponsors, but getting pulled away from the actual experience. You know, last summer, I joined an expedition with the Ocean Research Project, which is Matt Rutherford, who's another fellow solo sailor. And, you know, we were out there and I was in charge of my own like Instagram and social media, but I also took on theirs as well. And, you know, we had Starlink with like the 1 terabyte plan. So we had scientists aboard, all this sort of stuff. And long story short, though, I've never felt more disconnected from the ocean environment around me than when I had all that. And still to this day, I've never really decided like, okay, I'm going to take Starlink with me on this next trip so that I can share it from the moment, you know, I do everything. And I know that I kind of need to,
it's at like least a necessary evil
in a way. But, you know, in the past, what I've done is basically I record the podcast, I take video, I do all that stuff. And then when I get back, you know, but it might be 4 or 5 months of just complete blackout while I'm out at sea. But that allows me to stay connected to what I'm doing and where I am. And that's why I'm out there. I'm not out there to try and, you know, become famous. I'm out there because that's what I want to do and that's where I want to be. And so finding that balance, that sort of healthy balance between, okay, I want to capture this so I can share it later, and I'm not going to do any of that because I just want to be in the Zen moment the whole time. I think there's a balance to be had.
100%. And that's, you know, I haven't talked to Oliver. I don't know him. I'm just getting the little feeds and stuff, but he's obviously new to this world and new to what he's, you know, experiencing.
Oh, yeah.
And it feels like a lot of his videos, again, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it feels like he feels that. You know, I see it. You see his stories, and he's like, "Hey guys, you know, I'm trying to figure out what to film tomorrow. I don't even know what to film. Maybe I'll film me working on the motor." And you know, that's one of those things. It's you got to be careful what you wish for, or what happens, not even what you wish for. I don't know that he wished for that, but I just, when I see him speaking, that's what's beautiful about him. You know, is it's real. He's not. You know, I think we're all burned out on the whole, hey, everything's perfect. The world's perfect. This selling experience is perfect. Like,
check this out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm living the dream and I'm doing what all you guys want to do. And this is how you do it. And buy my 10-step course.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's like, oh my gosh, give me a break. But
he's very authentic, you know, from the get-go. Because I tracked him down before he left, like,
oh, wow.
I don't know, almost a month and a half, 2 months before he left. And we had a long podcast, and it was nice. And I was just I didn't want to be the master sailor who's just trying to dull out a ton of advice. Although I'm glad I gave him the one piece, which was,
check your
do
boat.
your daily check every single day.
He mentioned you a couple times, and I was that saved him, bro.
Yeah, it saved him in a couple of ways for sure. So, that's helpful for sure. But, his story is really inspiring because it's a lot of people feel that same way of like, I'm not really happy because I'm not doing what I want. I feel like I'm kind of stuck in this job. Now he has the extra prod of, having that diagnosis where, he got to kind of stare down the barrel of the gun as far as his mortality and how long his life could be or how it might change in a moment. So he had that extra push. But, then being able to talk to him when he was, I think, like 14 days or something out, we caught up for a quick podcast mid-ocean. And, he's feeling for sure the effects of the ocean, being on the adventure, being in it, and all that entails. Because it's not like a joyride, like you're saying. It's not a perfect world out there. And he's going through the seasickness, and he's going through that. And I think the big thing is that he's sharing it in a very, very real, honest way. And I think that's part of the draw, which has sort of catapulted him into this famous position at this point.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's got to be wild for you to watch that and just be like, dude, that was me. That was me 10, 12.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
don't you just see a lot of yourself in him? You have to.
Somewhat for sure. I mean, again, I had a lot more experience, and I had a lot more mentorship because for years I was hopping on as a crew member or as a first mate, and I got to learn from these great captains how to do this and how to deal with situations out on the sea. He didn't have any of that. And granted, he's sailing from, Oregon to Hawaii. It's a 2,000-mile trip. It's generally in the trade winds, and so it's not, he hasn't dealt with like a major low pressure system or serious like weather situations, and hopefully he doesn't. I mean, he's still got a little ways to go and everything, but it's one of those things where, yeah, I see a little bit of like kind of the joy, especially when he first left. And now I'm seeing a little bit of the, like, he's almost there, but he's been out there for a while. And he's kind of like, oh man, I'm still out here. Today turned into tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, I lost audio.
You did?
I can't hear him.
Oh, whoops. That's weird.
Hold on one sec. I lost your audio. I can't hear you. Is it on your end? Oh, I lost your video now too.
Uh-oh.
There you are. You're
there
back.
We go. We're back.
Right.
Technology. What can you do?
Did you see what I did? I'm like, Chase. That's why I could never sell solo. I'd be like, who's going to fix this?
Yeah,
myself? Oh, no, I'm dead. So, all right. Well, I want to get into some of these specifics. I have specific questions. So, mindset.
Shoot away.
Yeah, mindset. How do you prepare? We've talked a little bit about it, but going to be alone, how did you prepare? Did you prepare for that, or was it just kind of one of those things where, I mean, you obviously did the Appalachian Trail, so you had that. That was a lot. That was 70 days. But to think, I'm going to go around the world. You had your course? I saw your diagram. Is that kind of a way people do it? Is that a standard?
Yeah. Specifically,
trip?
You have
so you can hit islands, I would imagine, places where you can
Well, no, the goal
supplies.
is to stay pretty much away from land the whole time.
No way.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so man, I thought you like stopped and at least,
No.
had a beer at a beach bar or something, man. You just kept going.
That's part of the goal is to do it without putting your anchor down, without tying off to anything. So that remains to be like a nonstop voyage. And essentially, I mean, you leave from, the vast majority leave from France or England, because then you don't have to worry about the hurricane season and you can kind of stay out of the path. Leaving from the United States, I took on the extra sort of, I guess, danger, if you will, of having to cross the hurricane path in October, which is still the hurricane season. And, you know, I had to duck and dodge one tropical storm, which turned into a hurricane. But yeah, essentially you go down the Atlantics, or if you're leaving from the West Coast or something, the Pacific, and then you get down underneath the continents, do a lap around Antarctica, and then you come back up. And that's a traditional route, and it's typically between 24 and 30,000 miles to make it all the way around. And yeah, I mean, I think as far as the mindset going into that, I knew that I loved ocean sailing. I loved being out there. So I had that going for me already. And then kind of the stuff with being alone, especially on the Appalachian Trail, that really helped, because that gave me a sense of like, I don't think I'm going to go crazy out there if I have to go for 9 months by myself. I think I've got a pretty good head on my shoulders when it comes to being able to endure that solitude. I definitely got pretty weird by the end. Like some of the videos that I put up in my presentations towards the end after like 150 days are odd, to say the least, but they're very funny. You can tell that
starting to have a Wilson there with you.
Oh, 100%.
Really?
Yeah, there's one clip in particular where it's like I could have stood in for Tom Hanks in that, no problem. You know,
I just watched that like a month ago. I saw it come on Netflix, and I'm like, I just love that show. It's
such a good movie. I love it.
It is, and I love I'm one of those guys where, you know, I go hunting and camping and outdoors a lot, and I just the mental side of it is very intriguing to me, and how somebody would face that. And I thought they did a really good representation of that. I mean, you could tell me, was it pretty accurate how he just trying to process it all? I mean, it's like
the fact that he starts just talking to himself and then really talking to Wilson, but he's talking to himself. Like I never, like, if I made it to lunchtime without saying anything, I'd like murmur like, wow, pretty quiet today, aren't we? And then that would like start the ball rolling. But I'd have conversations with the boat and with the steering device, which I nicknamed Mongo, because Mongo is just an old servo pendulum. It's just a gear and like a rudder. There's nothing electrical with it. Oh man, it totally. And like I'm sitting there having long form discussions and all that. But I always figured that it would have been far stranger to not say a word for 9 months. Like, you know, you'd almost lose your voice.
I actually have a buddy in San Diego who lives alone. He's our age and lives alone, and he says, I was talking to him one time, and he's like, dude, he said there was a holiday or something. Maybe it was COVID. It might have been COVID.
Yeah.
But he's like, dude, I went 14 days without talking, without saying a word.
That's a long time.
And I'm like, you didn't get a phone call? You didn't, nothing? And he says, no, just one of those, it was my longest stretch. And I'm like, bro, I haven't gone 10 minutes without saying a word.
I say stuff to myself all the time.
All the time. All the time.
This thing, like, I'll just be walking through the grocery store talking to myself.
Yeah.
Like, that was a good conversation.
Yeah, it's like, and so I thought, man, that's got to be a weird mental thing to not say words, you know.
Well,
to not,
and I had to like
have them back.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like you'd lose it if you didn't. I feel like, you know, your voice box would just like seal up or something. But I do remember when I finished and I was up in Maine, the boat was hauled back out of the water. I had what I always call my hurt locker moment, where I was in a grocery store for the first time, and I had gone through this whole ordeal of basically running out of food and all this sort of stuff. And now I'm surrounded by everything I could ever want. And I'm sitting in this aisle and I'm just talking to myself out loud, full volume, what I should get, how amazing this is and all that. And I kind of look over and I see these two people staring at me. And I'm just like, and I just ducked. I ducked and ran, and I got out of there. And kind of had to. I think I went and ordered a pizza, which when I ate that, it brought me to tears. But
wow,
yeah, you know,
that's a lot like Castaway, where I love the part where he sees the ice in his glass, and
yeah,
you know, laying on the floor because he, you know, has been on a floor for so, you know, not in a bed, and it's like, that's unbelievable that you can relate to that.
Oh, 100%.
that him in the grocery store is after that long voyage is me every day.
Yeah.
Just kind of stuff. People look at me weird. I'm like, what? You don't do this?
Yeah. That's
right.
That's wild, man. That is very interesting. It's shocking because you don't hear these stories. People just don't have this experience.
Well,
not in my circle.
One more short one that really does compare with that, because you talk about him not being able to sleep in the bed. Well, I had been just basically exposed to the fresh air and constantly open to the world around me for so long. When I got back to Michigan, I actually built like a camp spot in the woods, and I was like, there's just no way I could sleep surrounded by four walls and a ceiling. And I spent the whole summer living out in the woods. I set up a little solar panel and a battery so I'd have electricity and stuff, but I needed to feel the breeze on my face, and I needed to hear the wind in the trees.
Did the video cut out?
I just knew that about myself. I was like, I can't make that leap, that transition this fast. I need to lube it up a little bit.
You must not have good bandwidth.
Or we don't. Yeah. One of us.
There we go.
All right, I see you. You there? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
That's crazy, man. So you almost like built your boat out in the woods just to
kind of
to have your little safe place. So it actually, it almost the place that was very difficult, no food and struggling, it becomes almost a comfort blanket.
100%. Yeah.
That is wild. All right, so. Yeah, I've got my list. I've gotten like 4 of them done, man.
We can do rapid fire if you want.
I know. So it's like how to not panic. How do you, when you get into some of these situations, I watched some of your videos, and I'm sure you ran into some bad weather and things like that. How do you always, I guess it's just self-confidence. You just have to have a lot of self-confidence in your abilities that you are able to get through things, right?
Well, I mean, there's a certain amount of that for sure, but the ocean, because it is so volatile as far as what it's going to throw at you, you really have to kind of be in the right sort of mind state. The idea of panicking for me is that's just a waste of energy. I like to typically just dive into work, and I'm doing this purposefully where I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm freaked out. That forecast that just came over my computer, that is scary. This is going to be a really bad one. So let's get to work. First step, let's start checking over the boat so we know that everything is in great working order. Everything looks good. Now all of a sudden, the blood pressure's down just a little bit because now I've got more confidence in the boat. And then it's like, okay, let's come up with a couple game plans as far as when the winds start hitting 50, 60 knots. What are we going to do as far as our sail plan? And let's have plan A, B, and C sort of ready to go. And now all of a sudden blood pressure's way down because I'm ahead of the game. And then, typically when the weather starts to build up and things do start get exciting, I've always found that time, your brain is already sort of in it at that point. And if you've got the confidence in the boat and you've got the game plans in your head, then you kind of go into it with a lot more confidence and just sort of knowing, okay, I've kind of have my idea what this is going to lay out to. Now, the ocean doesn't care about that at all, and it can escalate things really quickly. But I do find if you've got multiple sort of options when it comes to how things are going, you might have to bail out with your first plan and switch over to the next. And, sometimes that's part of it too, but you've sort of used that energy, that anxiety and that anxious energy to go through and get to work. And after you go through enough of these situations, then it becomes an experience and, a confidence builder where you're like, okay, I already know what I've got going. But, maybe the next thing that I go and try and do is, mountain climbing or whatever. And I got to relearn all that. But the lessons are still the same of like, okay, let's check over our equipment. Let's go ahead and come up with our game plans. Let's have ourselves an out. And let's not just sit here and worry and panic because that doesn't do anybody any good. let's get to work.
Man, every time you talk, I have 4 more questions I want to ask. This is not going to end.
Oh, we might have a number two. Oh,
yeah.
Follow up.
You're very smart. I love the way your brain thinks. I love the way you're obviously, I can tell that you are a very good speaker and coach because of the way you, I think it's just experience. But
Thank you.
I actually have on here plan A, B, and C. Yeah, you'd have to have plan A, B, and C. You'd have to have backups for the things that, that are important, right? Batteries. And I mean, just watching Oliver, it's like what you'd have to plan for the backups and things like that. But I love how you said there's no time, that's wasted energy.
Yeah.
I think that is so healthy for people to hear. And I can't imagine how much that one trip and all the things you've done they correlate into your daily life now. And how I got through that situation is like, well, now I can deal with this. I was out on that boat and I ran into this problem and I learned how to get through that. I can live through this over here, whatever it may be. And I think that's good for people to hear that are going through, for an analogy, a squall or a bad storm. My dad always says luck favors the prepared. I always tell,
It's a good one.
I always tell my, the people that I'm mentoring, it's like save your nuts, for your acorns for winter, plan ahead, be ready for what may come. But, I love how you said that it's, not something that you should waste time on.
Yeah. Use the energy and, utilize the fact that you're too anxious to sleep. So get up and get to work and do a couple of things that then when you do wake up, you're going to be like, oh, that's already done. I checked that off 3 times. And I think the only thing I'd add to that whole thing is that, also just believing kind of in your own abilities and believing in oneself does help. If you're like, listen, things aren't going to go 100%, but I'm pretty sure that I got what it takes as a person to be able to rise to any unexpected challenges. And I think that's just one of those things where you almost have to like Tony Robbins yourself and just say it over and over again until you believe it. But then when you've experienced it enough, then you really start to believe it because you've seen yourself in action. And, the ocean really does a great job of putting you in a position where you cannot press pause, you can't stop, and you can't be like, okay, hold on, this is too out of control. You have to deal with
Time
the
out.
whole time. Yeah, it doesn't stop. And so, you're in this beautiful position where there's no escape route. Yeah. And
literally.
And that's one of the difficult things when I talk to, companies and do corporate speaking stuff, that's where I have the biggest trouble of making the transition of like, you guys have to make the choice to stay in the fight because you can throw somebody else in front of it. But, here's what happens when you don't. And when you actually face it down and you run head first at it, these are the benefits and this is what happens. And, out at sea, we're just forced into it because, like you said earlier, it's sink or swim. And
especially solo, there's nobody you can't tap out. You can't get somebody else in there. Have you seen the movie? We talked about this on another podcast. It's like 13 Peaks or something like that.
Or
maybe 14
Oh,
Peaks.
yeah, where the guy goes and he climbs.
The Nepalese climber climbs all of them. And
amazing story.
He has amazing. And he has a quote in there where, like, I think it's the second or third peak, and he's trying to get up there, and it's bad weather. And the base camp's saying, hey, you can't go up there. We've been here for a week waiting. And he's like, I don't have time. I got to get up there. I got to go. And they're like, you're going to die. And he says, I wish everybody could get to a point where they think they're effed, bad word there. He says, because you have no idea how much more you got in the tank. But most humans don't want to be pushed to that.
Nope.
And I'm like, man, that's, everybody wants to live in their little comfort zone. And we all know that the growth happens outside of that. But most humans will never experience that.
I like this quote that he said. He said, I was told my plan was impossible, so I decided to name it Project Possible.
Yeah. And that's the mentality. That's the mentality that I think that I don't have that. I really don't. I have it in some business aspects and some different ways, but just having this conversation with you, and I always try to take these conversations and then apply them to my children because that's who I'm trying to raise the best that I know how. And it's like I'm going to start spending. I want to start spending some more time alone, and see what that feels like and where that takes me, and that discomfort, because I know it will be uncomfortable for my personality.
Well, yeah, I mean, usually right in the beginning, and for each person, it's always
like
going
you
to
said,
be
it's
a bit
normal.
different.
You went through that, and look where you've taken it. So it's baby steps. It's like you don't have to go. I'm not going to go do, 3 months alone, but a week or two, and just kind of see where that goes and what happens, and baby step it.
Well,
I found a quote.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say it because it's similar to what
I
Rick
say
said.
it all the time, and I never.
But he says sometimes when you feel like you are effed, you are only about 45% effed.
As a number.
Yeah.
And I loved that because I there's been a couple times where I got lost hunting and things like that, and I think, I'm in trouble here. This is not good. And then I think, what's gonna come out of me that when you're really surviving, when you're really where it's like not.
You find.
I think I got some ways out. I think I got. I think this is gonna be okay. But when you think, man, this is life or death. What am I made of? And I think for everybody to feel that at least once in their life is a scary, beautiful thing.
I like that.
Well, it gives you a lot of perspective, and also it places you and gives you a very realistic look at oneself, where you're like, how did I handle myself when it was literally like live or die moment? And you get to look back on that and you see. And I believe that every person has it in them to rise to the occasion when they're forced to. You get to see that, holy cow, like I got some stuff in me. That's pretty cool. And it's not an ego thing, and it's not trying to boast about it. I mean, it's one of those things where you get to see exactly what your character is and what you're made of, but your abilities in those situations. I mean, it's absolutely priceless when you go forward from whatever adventure you're on now, because life is a whole bunch of different adventures, and you learn from one and you take that on to the next one and the next and the next, and all that information and all that confidence and all that experience really add up to your ability to not only aim higher, because that's not always the goal, but at least go through and into any challenge with a bit more enthusiasm and hopefully have a lot more fun and a lot less anxiety and worry. Because that, for me, is the big goal. I want to enjoy the second half of my life as much as possible. And I don't want to worry about all the stuff that could happen and all that sort of thing. I just want to, utilize the experiences I've already had to help aim towards that goal. I still want to take on challenges. I want to slay dragons. I want to do all these things, but I also want to do them with a bit more enjoyment and a little less worry.
Absolutely. I love it. So let me go through these real quick. Let me see. One question I had, did you ever run into no wind? Do you ever run in? I mean, you have a motor on it, right?
Yeah, but
that's for just minimal use.
That was just, I wasn't using that for propulsion. I just wanted to keep the engine from dying. An engine, especially
batteries
on a
charged,
boat,
stuff like that.
That was all solar. It was just to lubricate the thing, basically.
Okay.
But I think
so
I
you
ran
get
into
out there where you had no wind and you're just sitting in a pond.
It was basically about 39 days total on that trip alone, where because you got to go through the doldrums.
I can't even.
Well, and
my
mentally,
my struggles, Jerome, are in hours, minutes.
Oh,
39 days of just sitting there in a pond.
Well, not consecutively.
I mean, not a row, but that's 39
total.
days of. Wow.
And that's the more mental side of things as far as the challenge goes, because you're not making any progress. You're, especially in the Southern Ocean, in between these big storms, there's areas of calm, and you're just sitting there waiting as the next one is rolling up, and you're just thinking to yourself, this is maddening, and the boat's rocking and rolling, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you're just totally stuck. So it's one of the most disheartening ones. But again, you use a lot of those tricks where you're sort of like, well, let's try and utilize this time to do this work or fix this or inspect that. Or, as Robin Knox Johnson always put it, he said, well, if you're having a really rough day, just go and read a book.
That's what I was thinking.
I utilize that time so much because you could sit there and stew and be frustrated and all this stuff. There's nothing you can do to change it. So you might as well find some sort of diversion, because sometimes you just need that. Because eventually, the wind is going to fill back in and you get back on your way. And I think that's probably one of the biggest tips, is just knowing that it's not permanent, and you don't have to make it all the way to the end of this challenge. You just got to make it to the end of this calm patch, and then you're going to get moving, and your emotions are going to improve, your attitude, everything. And just kind of picturing that in your head and being like, all right, yeah, I just got to make it this little bit. The calm should only last a day, so tomorrow we're on our way. So let's cheer up a little bit.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's cool. It's got to be pretty cool feeling to just kind of see your cells start to fill up, and the wind, the wind at your back, and it's like, oh, hey, it's coming back on now. And
like
you
it's
said,
the
just
best.
The things that none of us, I don't say none, but very few humans on Earth can feel what that feels like in that analogy of life, where if you're down, if your winds are calm, and just wait for that little breeze and then grab it and go, and like you said, this is hopefully temporary, and it'll be temporary a lot longer if you have the right mindset and take advantage of when the wind does come.
Everything's only temporary, right?
That's wild.
Absolutely. And it is. I mean, a lot of times it may sound like mind games, but sometimes that's what it takes to keep the morale going and keep you
tricking
in
yourself.
The fight, and going. And sometimes it's just by the skin of your teeth. Like when I was in the Indian Ocean, halfway across, there was a cyclone. Cyclone Irving was coming down from the north. And I'm in this big calm patch, and I'm cutting in front of this storm, which you're not supposed to do, but I need to get moving. And I'm looking at the forecast, and it was for 0 wind, and there was just like the slightest breath that came up. And talk about, the good feeling of like, oh, we're underway again. I mean, I'm sitting there cutting in front as this thing's coming down, and I'm in a vapor, but I'm able to just get Sparrow going. And I don't know what was the circumstance there, but I was very happy that I was able to get just on the edge of that storm.
I love it. Did you ever run into any pirates?
No,
we're all afraid of pirates, right? Is that kind of overdone?
I was when you're like more than 100 miles offshore, which I was usually like 500 miles offshore, you're pretty much out of their band, so you don't have to worry about them.
Okay, that was one thing I was scared about. Pollution, I saw your post on pollution. You've seen a lot of pollution, which is disheartening, right?
And unfortunately, it's honestly one of the things that I always feel I'm like embarrassed. I feel like the dolphins are going to come up and start like tossing it onto my boat or something like that, but it's I sailed right through
just shame. I'm sure it's just shame. Like one thing we do whenever we're traveling, I've been doing this for 9 years, is my kids will grab, plastic bags. I tell about it in another podcast where, we're in New Zealand and I go by garbage bags and we see a spot that's a little bit of garbage and we go around and pick it up. And most of the places that we've done it, people come up and, what are you doing? And I'm like, just getting garbage. And they're like, you're American. Why
you're American? That makes us look.
Yeah. And I'm like, I love your country. I love you guys having us here. We just saw some garbage. I'm trying to teach my kids to pick up garbage.
Yeah.
And they'll usually say, do you have a bag? And so I'm all about that.
Yeah. Right.
I'm all about that, and that's one thing with M42. We've donated to some garbage cleanups and stuff like that. So I just saw that you had posted that, and that little patch you went through where there's bottles floating in it out in the middle of the ocean, and that's just disheartening.
Yeah, and it's coming from everywhere. Obviously,
it is. Yeah.
In the ocean too. When you go slow, like I do in my boat, you see all of it, and there's certain concentrations, in the center of these gyres out there. Basically the middle of every ocean is the center of this current, and it all kind of gets sucked in there. And when you see the volume of it, sometimes it's pretty shocking for sure. But
which is just what's floating too, right? It's not even what's on the down stuck in the bottom. Okay, so my other question was, let's see, farthest, longest with no human contact. You kind of touched on that one. No wind.
What about no sleep? Like the longest with no sleep.
Yeah, because the boat will drive itself, but that's pretty sketchy.
If you're in a storm, I don't know how long a storm can last.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Can you go to sleep?
Yeah, typically I'm able to, once the boat gets into a rhythm, even if the waves are 20 feet, it's one of those things where the boat, after a while, it's not changing because you're still sailing the same course. And, you just sort of get used to it. And after the adrenaline sort of starts to seep out of you as the storm sort of sustains, then, I'm able to go down and get some sleep. I'm always a little hyper aware. And, if something changes, I'm
not a good deep
up
sleep.
Real quick. Yeah.
It's a light sleep.
In 2022, I got in a really bad storm, flipped upside down, broke a lot of stuff. It was really bad. It was one of the worst I'd ever been in. And it took me another, 16 days or something to get back to land to do the repairs. But on that, I was so traumatized by going through that night that essentially I couldn't sleep. And I had lost a lot of the safety equipment that I could set alarms for ships and things like that. So I had kind of I'd lost a lot of my artillery to make it safe for me to be out there by myself and sleep. And that was the one time where I was so sleep deprived, I was hallucinating a little bit. And, luckily I was able to keep myself in check, because the trouble is when you start to kind of lose your grasp on reality, that's when people sometimes make mistakes, you bad judgment calls. And, if I fall overboard, the boat's just going to keep going, and that's it, game over. And so I tended to really err on the side of caution the whole way back, and was just didn't go up forward if I didn't have to. It was one of those things where I was really trying to hem in what I would normally do out at sea, just because I knew I'm not in a mental state to be able to do all the stuff I want to. Let's just take it easy. Let's get back to port, rest up, fix the boat, all that sort of stuff.
How did you right the boat? How do you flip the boat back over?
Yeah. Well, the boat does it itself because it's got a big keel underneath the big fin, and that's where the majority of the weight is. So basically this giant rogue came up, and it was in the middle of the night, and I was down below, thankfully, trying to get a little rest. But it basically broke underneath me and lifted the boat up. We turned about 180 degrees, almost upside down, and then fell down the falls like a surfer. And when the boat hit the trough, everything broke loose in the boat. It ripped a whole bunch of the stuff off the deck. And then slowly but surely the boat came back to right side up. And then it was all crisis management, triage, and one of the longest, scariest nights I think I've ever had out at sea.
That's crazy.
Have you seen that movie? I'm sure you have or know about it. But that girl from Australia that sailed solo around, she was like a teenager.
Yeah.
That was
I can't
crazy.
Remember the name of it. The Netflix one that came out recently.
Yeah.
I watched that with my little cousins. Yeah.
Did you? Yeah, that was wild because she almost got home and then was down around the southern end of Australia and got in a bad storm, and it kind of rolled her and stuff like that. But yeah, man, I watched those shows, and I love those. Are like my favorite. The 14 Peaks or 13, whatever it was. Those
14 Peaks. There's
all these shows about climbers and sailors and people that just push the boundaries. And I don't know, it's just the human spirit, man. People like you are, I just can't give you enough credit. But one other question I have is, two. This is one's just a funny thing, because whenever I'm alone, and like I said, it's not for very long. I have a cabin and I'll go up to it for a couple nights. But I'm always worried that I'm going to choke when I'm eating. Did you ever have anything just weird where you I'm always chew your food really good because there's nobody around. Just weird thoughts from not being alone much, but when you're alone for hundreds of days.
Right. Well,
it's everything gets amplified.
There are
it's
definitely
you go through 1,000 ways to die.
Yeah,
exactly.
Your brain.
You're like, wait a second, I got to think about these things.
Rick chokes on a hot dog, and it's what happens? He took too big of a bite.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely some concerns that can seep into your brain. Things just things you wouldn't think of, like your appendix. If you're out there and your appendix burst, well, then
that's true. Yeah, I didn't think about medical. Dude. If you got sick.
And, well, to go back to Castaway, like that's a big fear. Is like, I get a bad toothache and I got to pull my own tooth out and stuff. And it's one of those where you can at least prepare a little bit. Like I did talk to my dentist about like if I had that happen to me, what would I do? And he told me the steps that I should take to do it. And
wow. It's a weird conversation.
When I talked to a friend of mine that's a doctor, he said basically, he's like, listen, the big thing that you got to worry out for is infection.
Right.
He's like, if you get a cut and it starts to get red all around it and that redness starts to spread and get worse, that's when you really got to start looking for options to get either to shore or to another boat that has medical personnel. He's like, if anything's going to kill you out there, it's going to be infection more than anything. And, it's one of those where, you got a nice first aid kit and all that sort of stuff, but you just got to be careful. I think knowing the risk that you're in, that realistic view of that, I think helps because it makes you make the right choice. And all these presentations I've done, there's always a question because there's a lot of video footage of me and I'm not clipped in. I don't have a life jacket on, all that sort of stuff. So I always have to explain that. And what it really comes down to for me is that essentially, if I am not clipped in to my boat, I am going to be holding on a whole lot tighter. I'm going to be aware of what the heck's going on. But moreover, I'm going to make a better decision on what I'm about to do, and I'm going to think it out a lot more than if I have this sort of false sense of security in this tether that I clip on, and then I think, oh, well, I'm
invincible.
Nothing can hurt me now. Yeah, exactly. And I've seen people do very stupid things when they're clipped in, putting all their faith in this tether. And I know sailors that are no longer with us that their tethers broke and they weren't able to, and it's like, well, that's something I think I'd ever recommend it to people. Like I always recommend use all the safety gear you possibly can. But for my own personal sort of experience, I like to know that if I make one mistake up there, it's going to be the last one I make. And that's going to affect everything from how I do things, but also the decisions on what I do.
I love that, man. There's some good information in there. I think that's a good analogy on, use the safety stuff, but don't completely trust it, and that's just wisdom, there. Because I've seen the same thing. I've still own 35% of these construction companies, and I come out and I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, it's fine. I got a rope. Bro, your rope's gonna, cut on the tin and you're gonna die. And they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. And I'm like, bro, you just because you have a rope doesn't mean you can just let go,
Well, I've always wanted to have a conversation about that specific subject with Alex Honnold, because, he does the free solo stuff, and I think he does a pretty good job, or at least he understands the whole idea of, there are these ways to make these things safer, but there's a reason that we're not using those.
He talks about a lot of different things. I mean, he talked about, I was at a seminar or something with him, and he was giving the whole speech. He was on stage and stuff. It was for a company that I worked for. But it was after he did free solo, and he was talking about doing like the side of Angel's landing in Zion. It's a crack. And he's like, I just stick my fingers in it. He's like, there's a secure feeling point. And he's like, you kind of stick it in there and it anchors down towards your pinky. And he's like, you can feel how solid that is. He's like, I just trust in all those little movements. He goes really slow. Like he talked about doing, what was it in Yosemite? What's that?
El Capitan.
El Capitan.
Yeah.
He talks about doing that. And he's like, I did it a couple times. He's like, I planned it out, put water, just like what you talk about. He planned it out very specifically so that he could be successful, and not have it, less danger. He talked about doing the half dome. And he said nobody, only one person was with him. Nobody up top knew he was doing it. And he said that was so much scarier because he's like, I was like a frog on the backside of this dome. He's like, I had nothing to grab onto. He's like, I was just stuck there for a second. He's like, so when I finally got to the top, he's just like, I was just so relieved. And there's all these people out just eating lunch. They had no idea where I came from.
Right.
And he's just like, it's like little situations like that where he actually thought that was going to be easier because it's just, so much simpler, but the complexity of the climb and no gear is completely different.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to see you come into port when you said on that 40 days across the Pacific and you were starving, and watch you pull into port and
oh man,
people sitting there getting onto their yachts for the Sunday, and you come out like
frazzled, just terrified.
Yeah, like, bro, what's up? You're talking to yourself, rah, 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 rah. It's like crying. You see him with the pizza, It's like that is you push yourself to the limit. So, one quick last question I have is two, but one is why'd you name it the Sparrow, or was it already named the Sparrow?
Yeah, the Mighty Sparrow. So
yeah, Mighty Sparrow. I remember that
it's
part.
kind of two things. Well, one, the actual bird, the sparrows have like huge migration patterns. So they're this little tiny bird that flies.
Did you name it, or was it named that?
I named it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, cool.
But
okay.
the Mighty Sparrow is one of the really famous calypso singers down in the Caribbean. And the whole time I was down there, when you first get there, trying to bridge the gap between the local population and me just coming from Michigan, it was difficult. And one of the things I started to do was basically, because I was in charge of captains that were like 20 years older than me, had been working at this place forever, and they're just like, here's another guy from the States coming down. And so I would go up to the local bars and I'd sit in the corner and be shunned for quite some time, but I'd buy rounds of drinks and stuff. But
soften them up.
Yeah, it was sort of getting into the music, and I stumbled across Mighty Sparrow, and this guy jams. He's like amazing, and I started listening to that, and that was a huge bridge, and it brought me together with a lot of these old guys, and then all of a sudden the relationship just kept blossoming more and more. And I just was always like mad respect for Mighty Sparrow, because his music is just, it's so good. And it bridged this gap that I didn't know how, I had no way of knowing how I was going to actually be able to relate to these guys and make friends with them. And all it took was the right music. And
that's
so,
awesome.
And the people that I met down there that I still know, like, they're some of the coolest people in the world, and I'm so fortunate to have been ingratiated into the community down there. So I was like, and Mighty Sparrow's a great name, so I'll throw it on
dude.
my
I
boat.
love it. I have a boat in Alaska, just a private fishing boat that I go up on every year and go fishing in Alaska. And it came with a name, and I haven't changed it, but I'm just always intrigued by people, how they name their boats, especially one, like that is so, you're so attached to. I mean, there's such an attachment, I'm sure, to that boat. I mean, I can't imagine, what that feels like. So
I feel like I'm married to that boat. Honestly.
I bet, man.
It's like a love thing.
Yeah.
I've been through so much, like it's a trauma bond, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, I definitely, you're talking
yelled
about
at it sometimes, had some good fights out there on the ocean, screaming at it, and then loving it sometimes.
Why are you doing this to me?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are my life choices I'm making? Yeah.
Oh man,
that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, how do people find you, Jerome? I appreciate you, coming on. I always tell everybody my Instagram is One Life So Live. That's my mantra. It's been that for a decade. And, time is the most valuable thing we have. So I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you taking this, hour and a half to talk to us.
I say that exact same thing whenever people come on my show. I'm like, the most valuable thing we have is our time. And 100%, you're spending it with me, and that means a lot. Yeah.
I genuinely appreciate you. I'm gonna, when we get off here, I'm going to invite you out to Utah if you ever want to come out.
Yeah,
heck yeah! I was going to say, where do I sign up? As
dude,
I
got a spot
guy?
here. I got a spot
have
here.
fun out here.
I got a spot here that's amazing, and you'll love it. So I'll hit you up after that. But how do people find you? So Jerome Rand. I'll do an intro, outro once we get off this for you.
Super easy. It's all Sailing Into Oblivion, and that goes from Instagram and like TikTok to YouTube. The book. Yeah, so I actually, during COVID, I had a children's book done up too. I wrote one of those.
Awesome.
So
cool.
That's also Sailing Into Oblivion. And the podcast, I just kept it all the same. Sailing Into Oblivion over everything. So
smart.
look for any and all. But I throw some videos out, and but mostly I really try and do the podcast, every week, a couple times a week, because I really enjoy doing that. And those are all the ways to find me.
I love it. Do you have a school? I saw one of your posts that talked about a school.
Yeah. I mean,
I'd like to, if there's ever a chance, sign me up. I'll come.
Well, you got to learn how to sail better.
I'm going to pay him to teach me.
Yeah, because you're going to be the sailor. That's what you're going to be.
I told my wife, I says, man, I just want to go. We ran into a couple. I know we got run out of time, but I was actually at a gas station in Italy. Had been there for a couple months in Sicily. And I go up to put gas in my car, and the machine wasn't working for my card. And so I'm like, what's going on? I don't speak the language. I'm having a hard time communicating. Finally figured out that it was cash only. And this guy comes pulling up, and I could see he's struggling the same way. And I'm like, hey, man, I'm not even going to try to talk to you. I don't even know how to talk. And I literally said those words out loud.
Yeah.
And he's like, what's up? And I'm like, you speak English? I haven't heard English for a while, and he says, yeah, dude. He's like, what's going on? I'm like, it's cash only. I'm like, what are you doing? And he says, I'm selling from the Mediterranean to America with my wife and 3 kids. They had a catamaran type boat. And I'm like, dude, I love it. So we went out and had lunch with them, went out to their little boat and their little raft, and never solo, never nothing like that. That's crazy. That's like so far outside my comfort, but I'd love to get on some kind of boat with my wife and kids and do like the Caribbean for a few months. I would do that tomorrow. And if there's any way that you can help me do that.
Starting spot. Yeah. Well, there's, it's one of those things where to actually have like a proper sailing school where you're providing the vessel and all that sort of stuff, the insurance, the regulations, certifications, all that is just bonkers. So the only way I get around that is essentially I don't use my boat. What I do is I coach and I consult aboard other people's vessels. So I sign on as a crew member, but I'm there to teach and to basically give the owner the confidence to be able to go after what they're having trouble with, which is usually the anxiety of going offshore or just utilizing the boat. I had this great client, Justin, out in San Diego, and in 5 days, he went from heart-pounding nervousness just leaving the marina to basically going out and ripping around San Diego, which is a busy harbor.
I've sailed in San Diego.
Oh, it's chaos out there.
They have little boats you can rent. And I actually sailed in Mission Bay, and then my uncle, like 25 years ago, took us out in underneath the Coronado Bridge and stuff. And it is chaos, man.
It is.
I was like 10,
everywhere.
But I remember thinking, we're gonna die. Those like battleships, and I'm like, the Exxon Valdez was actually there. It was when it was there really? with a ring around it, and I remember going by that. But anyway, I'd like to continue that conversation because that's
for sure.
On my bucket list, and some aspect of that I'm fine to buy the boat or whatever I need to do, to make that happen for the few months. So,
well, it is. Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where I am proud to say that I am an unaccredited sailing school, because what you're not going to get a certificate at the end, but what you're going to have at the end is a whole lot of experience and confidence in going after what you specifically want to go after. And that 100%. To me is far more important than a little piece of paper that has
100%.
Some governing body stamped on it.
I agree, man. I went to college and I was like 5 credits away from my degree, and I didn't get it. And my mom says, what are you doing? And I says, I learned everything I want to know. And she says, well, get the paper. And I says, I don't need the paper. I'm going to go.
Yeah, right.
I got the information, and they could not. And people are like, you ever going to go back? And I'm like, no. I don't need the paper. I have the info.
And none of them do anything for me.
Yeah. My parents were
I never show anybody the papers.
I was like 1 class away from graduating. And they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I took the classes I want.
Yeah. You're like, I got the skills.
So we're dude, you're speaking my language. I love it. I'm going to get off here now and stay on though. I want to chat with you 1 second. Thanks for coming on, man. Totally appreciate you. Thanks for leading a life that inspires us. That's very rare, and I am appreciative of people like you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all of it. It was a great conversation. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right, brother. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Dro.